So before starting for the first question, I forgot to mention someone who is very important and very dear to us. It's someone who provided for coffee today. And so it's Tech Writers Without Borders. You probably never heard of them, but we know them very well. Formerly, they were into STC France chapter, and unfortunately, STC France chapter died. But they said that they wanted to live again, and the team decided to do something very special and to create a group which is Tech Writers Without Borders. So they provided for the coffee and tea and viennoiserie, and I just wanted to mention and to let you know about their email, their internet, their mail, yes, the emails. So you can join them and you can maybe participate. Okay?
I hope they will provide for service learning projects in the future.
They might start with that, yes. So, okay. So this is done. Now we can go on for the first question.
Hello, testing the microphone. So I guess I'll be the host for the next 20 minutes. If anyone has a question, would you please raise your hand?
Okay, there is no first question. Let's go to the second question. I'm sure there's a second question. There you are, Ray Gallen.
Oh, yeah.
Please say your name, even if everybody knows you, Ray Gallen. Mention your name, the company you're coming from, and so we can listen back to those recordings later. Thank you, Ray.
Well, as you said, I'm Ray Gallen. I'm still Ray Gallen. And I'm from a company called the Transformation Society. I was very interested in the last presentation that we heard from Missouri State, and I relate it back to the student presentation earlier about bridging cultures, because what interested me was that it's a technical communication project, and both the projects that were described deal with social issues. Whereas normally we tend to deal with procedures, using technology, etc. And this to me was very, very interesting as to how you deal with the question of social questions, ethical questions in a technical communication context. I'm going to be speaking this afternoon about some very highly technological issues that have very important ethical ramifications. So I think that that's a really important area that we need to explore in this field. I'd also add that in my experience, most of the people who do technical communication are not technologists. Most, not all.
May I say something?
Yes, of course.
So one thing I tell my students is that you need to get your cape like a superhero, because technical writers can do anything.
I just spent 4 years in the Middle East teaching at Texas A&M University in Doha, Qatar. So I became quite cognizant and sensitive to issues of religion, race, and these kinds of problems that happen where researchers come in and they kind of, use a population and really use a population to gather data and leave. And then they, kind of write whatever they want to about these people because they spent 6 weeks with them. So obviously they know exactly what they're all about. So after I was there for 4 years, I really began to learn how nuanced culture is and how multifaceted, we are as a species, and how important language is to culture and to our very being. I loved that we had presentations in both French and English, and that's a statement. There's a statement there. You know, I want to give this presentation in French, and I think that's beautiful. And so part of my background being in language and linguistics and composition, you know, I have to bring those issues into technical writing when I do it. I have to talk about culture. I have to talk about language. The words that we choose have power. You know, and we're asking students to choose words all the time, and they need to recognize the power that is within the very words they're choosing. So.
I have a question.
Oh, microphone. You
You're
get a
waiting
microphone.
for the microphone. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hi. Well, I had a further question on the same topic, which was you mentioned the sort of the ethical sort of considerations in how you should translate Nicaraguan farmers, and whether they should sound like college students or whether they should sound like but you didn't say what you concluded as to how did it sort of pan out in the end. What was the conclusion of that?
So I would stop them when they would try to make them sound like college students. You know, I didn't want them to change the language. If there was a beautiful turn of phrase that we wouldn't say in English, I didn't want them to change that language. Do you know what I mean? I noticed in even one of the presentations, it was a two-faced coin. We would say two-sided. But I knew exactly what you meant by two-faced. You know, and so it's that kind of turn of phrase. I didn't want my students to change these beautiful happenings in translation into what I would say as an American. We had some professors that could do, you know, as nuanced things as they would say, we're going to hospital. And they would say, no, you're an American university. You need to say, I'm going to the hospital. You know, so it's that changing of the language. It's that restructuring of identity almost. And so I let the stories stand as they were. If there was a technical error, and we could see it's a technical error in translation, a comma or a misplaced, you know, quotation mark or misspelling the names from this place to this place, then we would fix that. But the translations, I said, you know, let these stand as the people's voices.
Because you could also argue that these people were speaking in plain Spanish, and so you should translate it into plain English that sort of is that sort of sounds the same to an English speaker as it would as the plain Spanish would sound to a Spanish speaker. Like
Yes.
So you'd if they are not sort of translate grammatical structures, not sort of translate them word for word, so sort of which would make them sound Spanish.
Yes, I think what the students wanted to do though was to pretty it up. So they were wanting to make it sound more complicated than the translation is what they found themselves doing, trying to make it, you know, trying to fill in gaps and fill in words and make it sound maybe prettier or more sophisticated than it was.
Okay, I got your point. Yeah.
I appreciate the discussion and bringing up ethics, and you in the discussion of that within the service learning projects. But I also think as our students work to develop the documentation on the different devices and things in the wearables, it's been a huge component, because especially in terms of security and privacy and surveillance. And so whatever the thing is that we are working to develop that documentation for, it obviously has the ethical component as you're discussing and working with it.
I just loved your radical collaboration. I'm gonna take that term home. I love it, especially where we're all coming from right now. Yeah, I love that phrase. That's beautiful.
Well, it's built on service learning. It comes from that theoretical and pedagogical background.
Your name, Deepo.
Hi, Deepo Ajose Coker. in your radical collaboration, coming back to that, you mentioned, or in the slide you had, user-centered design versus, or in another area, human-centered design. What's the difference?
Okay. In the resources, I share some very good ones where it shows that progression from participatory, user-centered service, human. The user-centered, when we think of our usability testing and when we think we go out and we see how something is used and so on, human-centered just brings in the human values, the empathy. It brings in that dimension. And rather than coming and I'm testing and I'm seeing how well you use this and how well I've designed that documentation for your use, instead I understand more the country, the culture, the background, what you are coming, where the human dimensions. So it just builds on that and also encourages relationship building. How as you work with, and you put it in service design, how do you see this distinction? Everyone here is trying to include others in the question as well.
Well, if I could just
Or
include myself.
does that suffice as the main component?
Of like user-centered as being focused on performing a task and
Yes.
how well you do as a user performing your tasks, and human-centered design being focused on the person, and that brings back the idea of empathy and
identity.
being in the other's shoes, basically.
But should there really be different silos? I mean, usability for me is including that humanity, is including that empathy. In usability testing, your usability testing in one country is going to be different from another country. In other words, you're already looking at that empathy and looking at that cultural difference. So is there a need to separate them?
Well, I think, short answer, I don't think these should be as demarcated as silos. And that's why we have the connection in the middle with the other colors saying, hey, how might we see these together and pull from all of them in terms of, as we focus to say what is a model of radical collaboration, so that you would not be stuck in any of those.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shui NG, and I have, it's not so much a question as a reflection on one of the issues that had been brought up in these service learning projects, which was that the focus on grading and the ultimate evaluation of the student was a distraction from the ultimate the success of their projects. And I just wanted to say that in industry, we've actually come towards that same preoccupation, because in industry now we're so focused on our yearly goal or objectives that in fact we've had to include as an objective a kind of business as usual objective, because otherwise we'd start to focus on these ancillary projects that the business wanted us to look at as well as doing our everyday work, to the point that we would leave our everyday work because we weren't going to be ultimately evaluated on that. And as our objectives or our goals in whichever system that we have going in our human resources software goes towards any bonus or did you achieve or exceed your evaluation and your goals. So in fact, all that's needed is for the evaluation to align in order to make that that same preoccupation a success. Because ultimately, if there's some kind of mismatch between what they thought they were going to achieve and what they ultimately achieved in their service learning project, as long as they can critically evaluate it and say, well, this is why it failed, then they should get a great evaluation, should get a great grade at the end. So that was my thoughts on listening to your presentation.
Sarah, would you like to answer that question or that preoccupation?
Well, I think ideally, if we can get students to focus on the process, by the time they get to industry, they can be working in Agile, Scrum, typical project management systems that do evaluate the checkpoints along the way, which hopefully creates better knowledge management and institutional memory for the organizations as well. So I think that's what our focus as technical communicators can be as we look to the larger role of what type of value we're bringing to the organization. Thinking not just short-term projects, but long-term industrial growth or finding best practices as we go through the different iterations of design or revisions. Did that answer what you were? Chime in?
It wasn't really a question. It was just saying that, you know, that as long as the student sees that it's not going to be, they're not going to get a fail because ultimately their project failed, because the way the evaluation works is just to say, you know, if it failed, why did it fail, and their critical description of how and why could actually be incredibly incisive.
Yeah.
And so therefore lead to a fantastic grade.
Mm-hmm. Where you could create an amazing project, but maybe burn every bridge as you have these different relationships. I think that's one of my bigger fears. Because industry's so small, you run into the same people at conferences. If you change jobs, you're going to bump into an old manager, and you want to make sure that you've got a good relationship with them, or at least, if not personally, at least professionally. So I think in the classroom is a great place to have those uncomfortable conversations about how do I manage this project or person more effectively, or how do I handle this tone or the way that this situation has worked out. So the safe spots.
Hi, my name is Dasha Dressen Hamuda. I'm head of the Technical Writing and Information Design program in Clermont-Ferrand, which is about 4 hours south of here. We're smack dab in the middle of France. It's a nice volcanic region if you want to come visit sometime. It's also the head of Michelin. That's where Michelin comes from. Okay, so actually I have a research-based question. As a pedagogical research-based question, because I carry out a lot of research on my own, trying to improve our teaching practices with our students. And one of the thing that made me think of this morning was when Sarah, I believe, was talking about why students don't succeed very well. The reasons why students don't succeed very well, one of the reasons being that they lack critical listening skills. Okay, so we're looking at a lot of the ways, or a lot of the things that happen to students during the course of their training or their university curriculum that keeps them from becoming professionals straight off the bat. Okay, one of the things that's come to our attention is that students don't necessarily apply what we teach. Oh, that doesn't surprise you. So, okay, I'm going to give you some more context. So, in our program, we also do service learning, and what we've noticed is that there's been a very, very high level of satisfaction with our clients. They've been very happy because our students are very adaptive. They'll essentially do what you ask them to do, and if you're not happy with it, they'll come back with something else the next day. So they're always looking for ways to improve. Now, my colleague and I, we have so-called best practices standards that we want to teach them, and we check these in our courses through mini projects. So she and I will do something. We'll do something like on tutorials or on online user help, and then lo and behold, we get to the end of the semester and the students turn in their project and they've not applied anything of what we taught. Okay, so I don't know, does this mean that we're bad teachers? Perhaps. I realize that we can address this problem through issues of genre learning. There are probably things to look at there, but I'd be really interested in having your personal thoughts about how you've dealt with this sort of problem.
I think we assume a lot of things about our students that, you know, interpersonal skills, everyone takes those for granted, right? But I'm sure that we could all improve them if we critically assess where do we stand on this, that I'm better at writing than I am at speaking, so on. Or I like to work as an individual versus on a team. So I think being more explicit in our instruction, where you say, I mean, I'm teaching this concept so we can apply it to your final project. I think, because they're overwhelmed too. I mean, you're taking how many other classes, and the concepts are difficult or brand new, and you've got how many pages of reading each week, right? So how do you remember all of these things and apply them all? I think it's going to be difficult, and I think it's our jobs as professors to kind of, I guess, be a little more explicit than I may be used to. So
I think a bit of it goes back to the previous question. It's this idea of evaluation, and I just was thinking about that word even in my head. Evaluate, value, right? It's to look for what am I valuing, what is important in this piece, and if I incentivize, a page number, then my students are going to give me that page number every time because I have said this is what I value and this is what you're going to be graded on, and so boom, they're going to get to 10 pages every single time. It's trickier to evaluate your ethical stance, your sensitivity to cultural needs, but if I'm telling them this is part of the evaluation in the form of a rubric, or in the form of even a reflection halfway through where they can self-assess how the learning is impacting their writing, where I ask them explicitly, tell me how what you've learned so far is transferring into your final project. You show me, you tell me how this reading is changing how you're viewing this paper. Through self-assessment. Because otherwise, I think students, think they know what they need to get the grade, and if I don't ask them to do any more than that, then I don't think they will. Our brains can only focus on so many things at one time. So I think it goes back to that evaluation. What do you value?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to add one additional piece here. I was thinking I became much more explicit with that sort of information when I began teaching online. Because you just have to be, you don't have this option of the back and forth. But then that being more explicit and transparent has then helped in my face-to-face teaching and hybrid versions and things. I also think of the impact of whatever learning management system we use. All the different ones out there. We happen to have been Moodle, and now we're using pilot testing, Canvas, whatever is the version. But I'm very amazed at my own changes in being more explicit with this most recent version, because then I have those grading rubrics there, and I talk about process and the different points, and then it helps me manage peer review, very many smaller peer reviews. So rather than here's just the one with 4 people, no, here's 1-to-1, here's another one the next week, here's another one. So students are constantly using what you've taught that week with each other, and that has made a difference in my own teaching and being more explicit. But I think we always struggle with the very, very question you raised. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I have a question for the audience, and in particular for representative of companies here, because we're trying to see what our best standard practices for our students. Do you have this kind of interrogation or question in companies? Do you have to teach some, not of our students, but to teach people have to have best standard practice? What is the phase you're going through to teach them those best standard practices? Have you got ideas, examples? Am I clear?
No, we're just doing a great job, right?
They come ready to go.
I'm not clear. Sorry? Okay, my question was not clear, so I'll try to state that again. Our preoccupation is to think how to teach our students to have best stand-up practice, to go out in companies and to apply for those best stand-up practice. Now, my question is, if we don't teach them that, will you have in your companies, when someone new is coming, someone from, not from Paris Diderot, of course, but from anywhere else, is it a developer or is it what? Do you have somehow a feedback to give to those people if they lack of best standard practice? Is it, oh, thank you, someone is.
Assuming that I've understood the question. So in my experience working at Thomson Reuters, where I've been for 15 years now, and when I started working there, it was a very different company as a technical writer to the one it is today. When I first started, it wasn't just very important, it was obligatory to be able to speak French because all the developers were French. And so the type of soft skills and associate skills that you needed, apart from the ones that you would be teaching to become a technical writer, were how to interview your SMEs, and that would be then the cultural side and the language side. But it was easy because they were there and you were there. Everyone was in the same building, and the most you were doing was going up and down a flight of stairs. Today, I don't work with anybody in my building. I have 0 developers on site. I almost ask myself why I go to the office, because I only communicate with my product manager, my product managers in New York, London, Bangkok. My developers are in Minsk, Bangkok, India, and now even my manager, my direct manager, is not in France. These are new skills that we did have to learn, and as a company, companies do, especially in France, I think that we're particularly fortunate because there is an allocated budget for training that the company has to spend on each employee. So we did have courses like how to work with Thai people, how to work with Americans. Because particularly, I don't think it was specifically aimed at the Anglophone, Anglo-Saxon people working in the company, but for the French people, there were issues working with the Americans for the first time. Suddenly, there was a moment when the American culture in our company was predominant, and we were starting to see that there was some misunderstandings born out of the cultural differences. For example, French people, please don't be offended, but when the American manager would say, "We're going to do it this way," the French would start saying, "Well, if we do it this way, this could go wrong, this could go wrong," because and it sounded, and so for the American manager, it sounded like no. Whereas what the French were saying was, okay, but, because they're very risk averse, or they just want to they're very analytical and want to critically evaluate what could happen if we do it this way. Whereas the American culture is more, let's do it, and if it goes wrong, well, we'll just stop and do it differently. And so these were aspects of cultural differences that you do actually have to learn or be made aware of, because they're not just going to come naturally, because often in industry, we're moving into these relationships suddenly, rather than organically as an evolution over time, because, I don't know, a merger, an acquisition, and what used to be the controlling dominant culture of your industry, of your company, has changed. Was that what you were talking about?
Exactly. Thank you very much.
And if I might add, sometimes it's different even within the same corporation from department to department, from site to site. And so we need to be adaptable and be able to listen critically to what's going on and understand there are probably nuances here that we need to pay attention to and make sure we understand, because it's different. I've had different experiences in my corporate experience.
I would love to have a recording of what you just said in my current class in international professional communication.
This is being recorded, right?
Right, but I don't know, you know, these little snippets of our conversation, because it's so critical. You know, we have a competency, ability to be part of and lead a global virtual team and all the components that are within that, which you just described, which I think is absolutely relevant to your question.
Definitely working in a global team, remote teams. These
right.
are skills. These are skills that that need to be acquired on top of all the other skills.
Right.
Can I ask another question before Ray asking his question? The courses that you have in a company of how do I talk or do I answer to an American person? Were they efficient to you, or was it your experience that you drawn conclusion from your experience, or this type of course very effective?
I think they are. What the course does is it allows you to stop working and spend time thinking about your relationships, because what happens when you're working is that you've got your job to do, and you're not going to stop and say, well, that phone call was weird. Why did X and Y happen? You just say, oh, okay, well, I'll do it this way then. And so the courses, well, they are led by an external trainer who comes in, and yes, they do have some kind of, there's a reason why that trainer has an experience that they have. And what they allow you to do is have a structured thinking and a moment of reflection on how things are how the cultures are different, how the working cultures are different, and therefore how you can apply that to what your experience of the working culture is. And actually, I think that's the most important part of when you get this outside trainer that comes, is the fact that you can stop working in order to think about these things. And that is valuable. I'm not saying it's not.
Thank you very much. Ray, you had a question. I saw your hand raised. No, wait for the microphone, please. No, you need one to be recorded. Yes, it has a strong voice, but it needs one.
Actually, I was going to answer your first question. I've also had a great deal of experience working both inside companies and as a consultant to companies. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the answer to your question is highly variable depending on what company you're in. For example, in the former iLog, now IBM, which several of my former colleagues there are here in this room, there was a very strong culture, certainly inside our department, and I think throughout the company, of wanting to study what were the basic issues, how do we deal with information, how do we improve the communication of information on subjects that were sometimes very complex. SAP is another company that has a very strong culture of trying to understand some of these issues. I've also worked in another company where I was the one who was supposed to bridge the cultures of United States, UK, France, Israel, and China. And we would have meetings in English, but it wasn't the same English. And so we may all have been using the same words, expressions, etc., but we had to verify that, in fact, we all understood the same thing by that. Not only that, but since the company was a roll-up of several acquisitions in which no work had ever been done to unify corporate cultures, we had that layer of cultural difference as well. And I can tell you it was a nightmare. It was also one of the best jobs I ever had, but it was also a nightmare.
Thank you very much, Ray. You also raise your hands. Can you please tell us who you are and the company you're coming from? Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Stuart Moody. I'm from Talland. And since I asked you to clarify your question, I thought I should reply to it as well. So what I understood the question to be is how important are all these soft skills we're talking about compared to knowing that 25 bullet points in a procedure is probably too much. And at the moment we are hiring 2 or 3 new people, and one of the first questions I always ask is, tell me about how you work with other people, tell me about how you get the information, and I'm far more interested in that than the writing side of things as well. So.
Thank you. Another question?
I'd like to react on, I think, what Anne mentioned is preparing students for uncertainty or ambiguity or a more complex world. And I think that's the whole challenge of working across those silos. It's being adaptable enough that we can adjust to whatever happens. And I find it great that you gave us all those examples about how you train people to become professionals in a siloed corporate world and how you work from the silos in the academic world to do that. And I think there are bridges, interesting bridges between those two worlds as well. So thank you for that.
I think I'd be sad if I had nothing but perfect projects. Do you know what I mean? Because we wouldn't have anything to talk about. So it makes everything interesting. And yeah, it's like, how can we fail? What can we learn from this? What will we do differently next time? But I will definitely be sharing the aspects of what types of skills do you use to gather this information with my students to show that this is what we need to be able to do, which is so hard to measure, you know? Thinking of rubrics and genre and figuring out how to quantify adaptability is really difficult. But I think the reflection that you were talking about, like the midway through, would be really helpful. I'll be integrating that for version 4 next semester.
Okay, any further question? So I just wanted to give a very short conclusion of this morning. It was so interesting seeing different ways of learning perspective in the US, and thank you very much for bringing that in. We will have also with Scott this afternoon another aspect, and then we will go to the real world. I mean, real world in companies, problems and research that is done. I just wanted to also say that here in Paris Diderot, at a master's level, we are very fortunate to have this degree in technical communication. We also have a bachelor degree in technical communication. Very happy to see Dacia, she's coming from Clermont-Ferrand, as she said. She's one of the very few in France to teach technical communication. We collaborate a lot, and thank you for being here, Dacia. And we also have another degree in translation. And translation in France has a very long experience. We are part of the European community. Translators at the European community are getting very old, so they will have to replace them. And no, I'm not joking, because 7 years ago they decided that they should be highly trained, the new ones, so they established what is called a European Master of Translation. That is a sort of a label they give to universities in Europe that rank to very high standards, and believe me, in Paris Diderot we had to fill such an enormous dossier on that, questions to answer, and we got the label, of course. So many European translation university are part of the group now, joined the team. And we have very few technical communication in France, at least university, because on the majority we come from the language part. We are an applied language department here in Paris Diderot. So we think that if you learn languages, you learn skills from the outside, culture, of course, and it's not too complicated to teach what is going to be scientific or technical, because we have this idea of culture. And I'm very thrilled also when I see students coming from literature, really literature studies, very, very specific of middle-age literature. And then they come because they want to change their job, or they don't want to be translators, or, okay, so they want a new job. And they become developers after, because they learned another language. So this bridge between literature and coding, and it's really, I saw it many times. There's one in IBM that...
My husband, exactly. He has we met in our master's program. He was literature, and now he's a web developer for NASA. So I don't know. Long path.
So if you need some clues on translation, I would be more than happy to help you on that aspect of translation. And unless you have a final question before lunch. Okay, no question. So please don't leave anything in this room. Be very careful with your personal computer and so on, because I was told by our IT manager here that there were some problems last week. So be very careful. The room will be left open, but take everything with you. We will come back at 2 p.m. sharp. I will bring, of course, the speakers to have lunch. You have many possibilities to have lunch around here. Here are the students. They can show you, or you can ask them, where do you want to go? You have little cafes, you have boulangerie, you have some little restaurants. So please ask me or ask the students. They will give you the information. Thank you very much for attending this morning, and see you, I hope, at 2. Bye.